20 years ago today, a Toledo man went on a murderous rampage in what many called a trail of terror.
In fact, this was how the news began that night back in 1998.
This firefighter is just one of a handful of people who were injured or killed after a deadly rampage in Toledo. Good evening, everyone. What can only be described as a trail of terror ripped through West Toledo today.
As a result, 3 people are... Joe Chappell killed 2 and wounded 4 others Friday, February 13th, 1998, before Toledo police shot and killed him.
Now, there were 5 crime scenes that day. A deadly stabbing on Brook Park, a carjacking on Alexis Road, a shooting at Jackman in Sylvania, a deadly shooting on Barrows, and the final scene, Toledo police shot and killed Joe Chappell at Monroe Street near Secor. And tonight, for the very first time, 13 ABC's Jeff Smith reunited those who responded and investigated the Trail of Terror. And 20 years later, they're still trying to process what happened.
This was something that didn't happen to me. This is something that happened in LA or New York. And it was more, to me, of a movie. It's like, I can't believe this is happening.
It's been 20 years since these 4 responded to and investigated Joe Chappell's Trail of Terror. And 20 years later, the stress of that day lingers.
Every Friday the 13th I've ever worked since then, this always comes back to me.
Captain Joe Heffernan was a patrolman and says he responded to the first crime scene, finding 1 victim and 2 stabbed children.
I always would get a little anxiety every Friday the 13th when I was worked ever since then.
It was surreal. It was almost like a fog, and I'm sure everybody can attest to that. It's like,
Detective Nick Estevanic, who is now undercover, fired one of the fatal shots at Monroe and Secor that ended the rampage.
I remember what I did, but I don't remember specifically going through the motions. It was kind of instinctual.
Certainly, we absolutely never want this kind of thing to happen, but when you look back on this, there was a lot of good that came out of that day. 3 people survived, 2 children and a fire lieutenant, and that's because of the work we did.
Current Battalion Chief Mike Benedum says he was working a life squad that day and was on the ground trying to save the life of a paramedic who had been shot. That paramedic survived, and back in 1998, we visited Lieutenant Jeff Cook in the hospital as he recovered.
For as bizarre and violent as this was, protracted as this was, as rapidly as it unfolded, these 2 agencies...
we became one.
We became one. We really...
Teamwork was tremendous.
The teamwork, we were one.
But this was a totally unusual and high-powered case.
Former TPD officer, investigator, and author Frank Stiles. Part of his book, City Soldiers, details Chappell's Trail of Terror.
This was a totally unusual case. And like I say, this is something you see in the movies.
20 years later, the group still credits Toledo Police Sergeant Bob Case for tracking Chappell down and helping to bring the rampage to an end. It was a day they all agree they were trained to handle, but they say they hope they never see a day like it again. Jeff Smith, 13 ABC Action News.
Boy, and we were just talking about this, and hard to believe it was 20 years ago because I remember it so distinctly. We were here in the newsroom that night hearing all the information coming over the scanners, and it was just controlled chaos, but it was definitely one of the biggest news stories that have ever happened.
Yeah, because so many scenes, as we said, were playing out and happening so quickly. Never heard scanner traffic like the day and the evening we heard that day 20 years ago.
And then hard to imagine for a lot of people in this area, one of the busiest intersections,
Right.
Monroe Secor, right by where that Kroger is, that's where it all ended. So tremendous effort by police and horrific for the people who lost loved ones that day. And there were some innocent people who died that day as well by this guy.
Yeah, and we thank the heroes who came forward to talk with Jeff, to talk about that fateful day.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, rescuers call it a disturbing